In the summer of 2014, Hamas's indiscriminate attacks on Israeli population led to a military response which resulted in an uneven ratio of casualties, including the regrettable death of civilians. But was this a disproportionate response? No. Proportionality does not mean keeping the number of enemy casualties in any proportion to one's own. Rather, proportionality means refraining from intentional or unnecessary harm to civilians. A crime occurs if there is an intentional attack directed against civilians, or an attack is launched on a military objective in the knowledge that the incidental civilian injuries would be clearly excessive in relation to the anticipated military advantage. Luis Moreno Ocampo, Chief Prosecutor, International Criminal Court. Israel did not intentionally attack civilians. In addition, Israel sent Palestinians a variety of warnings prior to the attacks on military objectives in order to minimize civilian casualties. Colonel Richard Kemp, former commander of British forces in Afghanistan.
No other army in the world has ever done more than Israel is doing now to save the lives of innocent civilians in a combat zone.
Kemp's conclusions are supported by America's highest-ranking officer, General Martin Dempsey.
Israel went to extraordinary lengths to limit collateral damage and civilian casualties.
When comparing civilian casualty ratios to other democratic forces fighting an asymmetrical war, Israel stands out in its success to minimize the damage to civilians. This ratio could have been much lower if it weren't for Hamas's strategy of operating from within densely populated areas, including schools, hospitals and mosques, and their calls to civilians to ignore Israel's warnings.
يتعرض الناس بأن يواجهوا الطيران العسكري الإسرائيلي بصدور عارية ليحموا بيوتهم. أعتقد أن هذه سياسة أثبتت نجاعتها، ونحن في الحركة ندعو شعبنا إلى اعتماد هذه السياسة.
Official Hamas combat manuals acknowledge Israel's self-restrictions and caution towards civilian lives, and go on to explain the advantages of using their civilians as human shields, both as protection for their rocket infrastructure and as a tactic to exploit civilian damages to gain popular support. Hamas could have avoided 90% of Palestinian fatalities by accepting the July 15th ceasefire offer prior to Israel's ground operation. But this was rejected, along with 10 ceasefire offers that Israel accepted. The real disproportionality in the Gaza war was between the intentions of both parties, between Israel's active efforts to minimize civilian casualties and Hamas's war crimes against civilians.